Developed as part of the Brabazon Committee, the Bristol Type 175 Britannia was an airliner that, had it been released a decade prior, would have been a global success for the British aviation industry, this machine being one of the first transatlantic turboprop airliners and was notable for its exceptional performance in a variety of roles, both civilian and military. However, the Bristol Britannia would prove to be one of the most monumental failures in civil aviation, as following various controversial events, including the loss of the second prototype and a protracted battle with launch customer BOAC, the aircraft wouldn't enter service until just a year prior to the Boeing 707 jet, thereby rendering it almost completely obsolete from the moment it left the factory. The Bristol Britannia's story begins during 1942, when even at the height of World War II, the British aircraft industry busied itself with prospective commercial airliner projects that would be released following the end of the conflict, thus ensuring that the UK didn't lose its place in the civil aviation market to the powerhouse of the American economic machine. In 1943, the Brabazon Committee was established in order to investigate the future for British airliners, with Bristol winning the Type 1 and Type 3 contracts, with the Type 1 being for a gigantic transatlantic airliner in the form of the Bristol Brabazon of 1949, a machine that was essentially a flying ocean liner with an onboard cinema, a la carte restaurant and sleeping accommodation, while only seating a small number of passengers despite its enormous size. Unfortunately, the Bristol Brabazon was an airliner that completely misread the changes in the aviation industry, where lavish giants as per the pre-war flying boats had given way to models that placed capacity over luxury in order to get the best cost per seat mile ratio, and thus the Brabazon would never enter service and be scrapped inauspiciously. As for the Type 3 specification, in 1946, the newly formed British Overseas Airways Corporation, or BOAC, set out the requirements for what was known as the MRE, or Medium Range Empire Airliner, with specification C2/47 being issued in April 1947 by the Ministry of Supply, requiring an airliner capable of carrying 48 passengers and powered with Bristol Centaurus radial engines or Napier Nomad turbo-compound diesel engines. At this stage, turboprops were considered, but were so new that Bristol could not guarantee their performance, while initially, Bristol proposed the quick conversion of Lockheed Constellations to Centaurus 662 power plants under Proposal X, while Proposal Y was for the licensed production of the Constellation during late 1946, though in the end, BOAC decided that an entirely new design was preferable. After wrangling between the Ministry of Supply and BOAC over costs, the project was given the go-ahead and assigned the company designation Model 175 in July 1948, with 3 prototypes being ordered that were designated Mark I for the first unit, as powered by Centaurus 662 engines, and the second and third prototypes being designated Mark II, and could be converted for use with Bristol Proteus turboprops once they became available. In October 1947, with work already underway, Bristol had settled on a Centaurus-powered design with a gross weight of 103,000 pounds and a payload of 13,000 pounds, with the anticipated Karachi-Cairo run requiring a 48-seat limit including sufficient fuel for the lengthy stage, with July 5, 1949, seeing the Ministry of Supply order 5 such prototypes, with the understanding that BOAC would contract for 25 production units, the carrier purchasing options for 25 units on July 28th, which would be of the Mark II configuration, whereby conversion from Centaurus to Proteus engines could be possible. In November 1948, the Type 175 was revised again to accommodate 74 passengers and a longer wingspan in contemplated long-range version, and was thereby aimed at long-haul Empire and transatlantic routes rather than the medium-haul Empire routes originally planned, with BOAC, based on this change, considering that only the Proteus engine could make this particular model viable, thus requiring a major redesign. However, the desire to have the Type 175 be fitted solely with Proteus engines caused a rift within the BOAC senior management, with Deputy Chairman Whitley Strait considering the Proteus engine to be already obsolete, though regardless of this internal wrangling, the Type 175 project was contingent on the Proteus passing a 150-hour type test. During April 1950, the airliner's name, Britannia, was selected, and the designation Britannia 101 was applied to the first pair of prototypes, which were powered by the early Proteus 625, the successor to the 600 series engine that had already completed type trials, with the first prototype, Golf Alpha Lima Bravo Oscar, taking to the skies for the first time on August 16, 1952, under the command of Bristol Chief Test Pilot A.J. Bill Pegg. During the maiden voyage, The oversensitive flying controls led to wild pitching before Peg restored normal flight, while during the landing approach, smoke filled the cockpit and the main undercarriage bogie temporarily stuck, only fully deploying seconds before touchdown. These glitches being resolved by September, and thus meant the Britannia could undertake a stunning display at that year's Farnborough Air Show. What was immediately notable for the Britannia was its exceptional quietness, thus leading to it being dubbed the Whispering Giant, while in November of the same year, Popular Science reported that by 1954, BOAC would have 25 of these aircraft en routes such as London to Tokyo over the Arctic and North Pole. However, the Britannia program was interrupted by the crashes of 3 de Havilland Comet jets during 1953 and 1954, thus requiring the Type 175 to undergo lengthy fuselage tests at the behest of the Air Ministry, while further delays were attributed to teething problems with the engines. On February 4, 1954, the Britannia suffered a major setback when the second prototype, Golf Alpha Lima Romeo X-Ray, crashed into the mudflats of the Severn Estuary near Bristol, following an uncontained engine failure that led to a fire, a potentially fatal outcome for the test crew being narrowly avoided thanks to their exceptional skill. The flight had departed from the Bristol facility at Filton as normal, but just 7 minutes into the run, flight engineer G.L. Jones noted that the engine temperature of the No. 3 Proteus had reached 90 degrees Celsius, with this unit having been fitted with modified reduction gear, to which test pilot Pegg cut the power to the engine in order to cool the power plant and demonstrate to the guests aboard the Britannia its ability to fly with a failed engine. However, upon restarting the No. 3 engine, an explosion, followed by a large fire, engulfed the power unit, Pegg attempting to return to the airfield before the flames reached the starboard fuel tank, though it soon became apparent that the explosion of the No. 3 engine had damaged the adjacent No. 4 engine, thus causing it to begin disintegrating. With the potential of making it back to Filton growing less and less likely with each passing minute, Pegg opted to put the stricken Britannia down on the exposed mudflats of the Severn Estuary at low tide, 14 miles from Filton, the power to the airliner failing just prior to touchdown, but through the skill of Pegg and former KLM pilot Jay Mallowan, they were able to belly land the aircraft, coming to a safe stop in the mud with only minor injuries reported. In the aftermath of this near disaster, it was determined that the failure in the reduction gear was caused by a complex vibration phenomenon involving a plate vibration of the planet gears excited by sun gear tooth impacts, with the tooth impact loads being removed in favor of a double helical design for the high-speed gear train, Golf Alpha Lima Romeo X-Ray, while surviving largely intact, never being repaired or flying again, being instead used as an instructional rig for ground operations. However, the accident involving the second prototype would be but a fraction of the problems that would occur shortly afterwards regarding an icing issue identified during testing, where an icing of the engine air intakes would lead to dangerous flameouts, a problem that Bristol would struggle to address through 1955 and into 1956. In response to the icing issue, BOAC's managing director, Basil Smallpiece, made his dissatisfaction with the Britannia very clear due to the delays caused, with his statements echoing across the aviation industry and thus souring confidence in the new airliner for prospective customers. The motivations behind Smallpiece's outbursts have been subject to debate, with some believing that his very public shaming of Bristol was done as a means to try and get them to solve the issue with greater expedience, while others considered it a means of BOAC to try and wriggle out of their order for 25 of the turboprops and thus allow them more capital to purchase additional examples of the upcoming Boeing 707 Jet of America. Whatever the reasons, Bristol would finally resolve the icing issue through the fitting of a platinum glow plug pilot light that would automatically relight an engine if it flamed out, though this solution was less than satisfactory and had the added problem of delaying the 5,000-mile range Britannia 310 series coming up behind the original Series 102s. To this end, Bristol could not be entirely blamed for the Britannia's delays, with the company being badly hampered by the red tape of the government's transport ministry, which had to approve new standards for the state-owned BOAC's new aircraft models, in addition to ordering exhaustive fatigue tests on the Britannias after the crashes of the Comet jets, while BOAC itself demanded frequent design changes. Finally, however, the first Britannia Series 102 production aircraft would be introduced by BOAC on February 1, 1957, entering service on the London to Johannesburg run, though Smallpiece was quick to point out the 19-month delay to the Britannia's delivery, and the fact that it had held down BOAC's net profit in the 1956 fiscal year to $850,000. To try and make up for this loss, BOAC would invoke contract penalties against Bristol, citing the fact that it had lost $5.6 million due to the delay of the longer-range Series 312s that would be vital for the company's transpolar services to Tokyo, while BOAC chairman Gérard Delanger compared Bristol unfavorably to Boeing, citing that the 707 was being developed on time despite being a more complex machine. Nevertheless, BOAC would initially take on 15 Series 102s, with the last 10 examples of the original 25-unit order being cancelled in favour of the Series 312, of which 18 examples would be built, the 102s being put to work on services to the Middle East, while the 312s were considered suitable for the London to Sydney route and were purchased at a cost of £768,000 per unit. Alongside BOAC's fleet, there was also some international interest in the Britannia, including orders from El Al of Israel and Canadian Pacific Airlines, while Aeronaves de Mexico, Transcontinental SA of Argentina, Hunting Clan Air Transport, and Cubana de Aviación also took on examples during the original production run. At the same time, there was significant interest from the United States, who had seen the potential of turboprop airliners with the earlier Vickers Viscount, with the Britannia offering a possible transcontinental or transatlantic range turboprop with greater speeds and public appeal, with Eastern Airlines showing initial interest, while following TWA majority owner Howard Hughes' flight of a Britannia, he placed an order for 30 examples to be delivered at the first opportunity. Beyond civilian operators, the RAF ordered 23 mixed passenger cargo aircraft for use by the Air Transport Command, including 3 Series 252 and 20 Series 253, which were delivered between 1959 and 1960 as the last examples of the Britannia to be built, 18 of these units being constructed by the Short Brothers Company of Belfast in order to keep the Northern Irish aircraft builder employed during a major slump in productivity. However, the very public falling out of BOAC and Bristol had irreparably damaged the Britannia's chances of being a sales success, with Qantas of Australia having initially considered the procurement of a Britannia fleet, but due to its protracted development and the problems related to the icing issues, they preferred instead to wait for the Boeing 707 to come online during 1958. At the same time, once the Britannia had finally entered service during 1957, the Boeing 707 was only a year away from entering service itself, and with the future firmly set with this new airliner, which far exceeded the performance of the Britannia, any further interest in this machine dried up rapidly, the production run of the original model ending in 1960, with only 85 examples ever built. However, despite the Britannia having ended production, further examples of the general design were assembled under license by Canadair from their factory in Cartierville, Quebec, with the first example of what was dubbed the CL-44 taking flight on November 15, 1959. Sadly, similar to the Britannia, the test phase was wrought with problems, including complete electrical failures and engines shaking loose and almost falling off mid-flight, while due to supply issues at Rolls-Royce when delivering the Tyne 515 turboprops, this would see multiple assembled examples placed into storage at their production factory without engines for weeks at a time. Regardless, 33 CL-44 examples would be built, including 12 units built for the Royal Canadian Air Force, dubbed the CC-106 Yukon, while at one point even the US Air Force considered purchasing examples of the CL-44, though due to recent controversy surrounding the cancelled procurement of foreign models, such as the ill-fated CF-105 Arrow fighter, their need for military transports would be satisfied by the Boeing 707-based KC-135. Similarly, Canadair had also developed from the Britannia's underpinnings the CP-107 Argus of 1957, a maritime patrol aircraft of similar configuration to the Avro Shackleton, and had originally been designated the Britannia Maritime Reconnaissance or Britannia MR, the fuselage being completely redesigned by Canadair, going from the pressure cabin used in the Britannia to an unpressurized one with 2 18-foot-long bomb bays fore and aft of the wings. The Argus would enter service during 1958 in order to replace the last of the Avro Lancasters and Lockheed Neptunes of the RCAF, and were assigned to 404 and 405 Squadron during initial deployment, and later 415 Squadron, 407 and 415 Maritime Patrol Squadron, and the No. 2 Maritime Operational Training Unit, 33 examples ultimately being built, and remained in service with the Canadian military until July 1981, when replaced by Lockheed P-3 Orion-based CP-140 Auroras. One further variant of the Britannia design came in the form of the Conroy Sky Monster, a 1969 conversion of a CL-44 to specialized cargo configuration that included an expansion of the fuselage to accommodate oversized loads. this work being conducted by John M. Conroy at his works in Santa Barbara, California, with the Sol unit, November 447 Tango, taking to the skies for the first time in its new guise during November of that year. The Conroy Sky Monster would operate with various companies over the course of its long career, including Transmeridian Cargo, British Cargo Airlines and Azerbaijan Airlines, while a second unit was ordered based on the design of the first, but the CL-44 allocated for conversion was lost in a crash prior to delivery in December 1970, the unique Sky Monster eventually ending its days at Bournemouth Airport in England, where it was broken up for scrap after years in storage during December 2024. Back with the Bristol Britannia, once Boeing 707s began to enter the fleet of BOAC during 1960, the turboprop's fleeting career as a mainstay of the company's long-haul operations came to an end, with the most notable route for the Britannia being on the westbound London to Hong Kong via New York, San Francisco, Honolulu, Wake Island and Tokyo run, while other routes included the prestigious London to New York service. However, with the arrival of the 707, Britannias were quickly relegated to secondary services, or were chartered out to other carriers including Cathay Pacific, Central Africa, East African, Nigeria and Malayan Airlines, BOAC's ownership of the Bristol Britannia peaking during March 1964, with 50 of the 85 units built being on their books, though in April 1965, the last Britannias in service with the carrier were withdrawn. From there, ex-BOAC Britannias filtered down through various second-hand operators, including Monarch Airlines, Donaldson International Airways, British Eagle, Air Spain, Caledonian Airways, Britannia Airways, and Redcoat Air Cargo, with the last European passenger flight by a Britannia being in October 1974, when Monarch Airlines owned Golf Alpha Oscar Victor Tango worked a flight from Luton to Lisbon and back on behalf of Northeast Airlines, this aircraft being donated for preservation at Duxford Aerodrome. With the RAF, Britannias were used for various operations by multiple squadrons, including number 99 and 511 squadrons, though with the arrival of the Vickers VC-10 jets during the mid to late 1960s, the Bristol Britannia C-1 and C-2s in service with the British Armed Forces were eventually retired during 1975, with most examples finding home with second-hand cargo carriers into the 1980s. One significant event involving the Bristol Britannia was the part of an El Al example in the capture of Nazi war criminal Adolf Eichmann during May 1960 by agents of Mossad. Eichmann, one of the architects of the Holocaust, having been located in Argentina, and on the night of May 11, 1960, was abducted off the street near his home in Buenos Aires, before being sedated and then flown out of Argentina in the hold of the same El Al Britannia that had arrived with the Mossad agents. Eichmann being put on trial in Jerusalem for crimes against humanity and was hanged on June 1, 1962. The most notable career for the Bristol Britannia would be with Cubana, which received their units during 1958, just prior to the communist takeover of the island nation by Fidel Castro during the Cuban Revolution, though despite wider Cold War tensions, the British aircraft industry was obliged to maintain parts provision for Cubana's Britannia fleet. In 1975, Castro, in order to support the MPLA, or People's Movement for the Liberation of Angola, in their fight against the sitting government during the Angolan Civil War, dispatched Cuban armed forces to the African nation during Operation Carlotta, using requisitioned Cubana Bristol Britannias as troop transports, performing 101 flights between Cuba and Angola during the first few months of the operation, while the last examples of the Britannia in service with Cubana were retired in March 1990. The last airworthy unit was Britannia 250 Echo Lima Whiskey X-Ray Alpha of Transair Cargo, which had been delivered new to the RAF in September 1960, before filtering down through various cargo operators after its retirement from military service in 1975, the aircraft performing its final flight on October 14, 1997, when it landed at Kemble Airfield after a multi-stop flight from the Congo, whereupon it was restored to its original RAF condition, registration and name of Regulus. In terms of accidents, 14 Bristol Britannias were lost with a total of 365 fatalities between 1954 and 1980, the first accident, aside from the loss of the second prototype, taking place on November 6, 1957, when Series 300 prototype, Golf Alpha November Charlie Alpha, crashed at Downend near Bristol for unknown reasons, though faulty wiring with the autopilot system was suspected, the accident resulting in the loss of all 15 Bristol technical staff on board. On September 1, 1960, Britannia Airways Flight 105, as operated by Series 102 Golf Alpha November Bravo Bravo, crashed while landing at Ljubljana Airport in Yugoslavia due to the crew having failed to set their altimeter to QFE rather than QNH, resulting in a 980-foot error in the indicated altitude, with 98 out of the 117 aboard being lost in the crash. The worst accident involving a Britannia took place on April 20, 1967, when Globe Air Series 313, Hotel Bravo India Tango Bravo, flying from Bangkok to Basel, was forced to divert to Nicosia Airport in Cyprus due to bad weather in Cairo, though due to a severe thunderstorm at Nicosia, the aircraft crashed into a hill after 3 missed approaches, due to the pilots exceeding their authorized duty time and a lack of experience with the first officer, resulting in the loss of 126 people with only 4 survivors. The final accident involving the Bristol Britannia took place on February 16, 1980, when Redcoat Air Cargo Britannia Series 253F, Golf Bravo Romeo Alpha Charlie, crashed at Billerica, Massachusetts shortly after taking off from Boston's Logan Airport due to an accumulation of ice and snow on the airframe before takeoff, and a further accumulation of ice when it was flown into moderate to severe icing conditions, leading to the deaths of 7 aboard with only 1 survivor. Today, 7 Britannias have survived into preservation in varying degrees of intactness, including the cockpit of damaged second prototype, Golf Alpha Lima Romeo X-Ray, while complete airframes include the last airworthy passenger unit, Golf Alpha Oscar Victor Tango of Monarch Airlines, and the last airworthy example overall, X-Ray Mike 496. To summarize, the Bristol Britannia was a concept that had all the potential to be a world-beating airliner had it not been delayed during its test phase, with the original launch date of 1955 to 1956, easily putting it at least 3 years before the Boeing 707, and thereby meaning it could have served as a suitable stopgap for various carriers prior to the arrival of the new jet airliners during the latter half of the decade. Instead, the Britannia became a much-loved but often overlooked footnote of the aviation industry due to its squabbles with BOAC and various teething issues culminating in its arrival only a year before the 707, with the model leading a largely inauspicious and short-lived career with most carriers, despite the huge amounts of advanced technology and design that put it leaps and bounds above piston-powered equivalents.